This episode, Hiring a Contractor, the third segment in a short series. The Handyman Pros continue the discussion on hiring contractors, what should be considered with, and how to avoid potential problems. This segment includes information on writing contracts, performance indicators, and more. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation. This edition is entitled Hiring a Contractor, Part 3. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, what's been going on this week?
Hey, Larry. Well, I think you know what's been going on this week. You and I had just done a pretty good job, as all-day job on a pretty rotten window. A big window. Took a lot of work, and ran across a couple of black widow spiders and things like that. So that's been exciting, you know.
That was a little bit of excitement. It was really a good. We'll have some video. I think we're going to post some video on that one. It really was an interesting. What do we want to call this? Effort in what happens when you ignore water infiltration, water rot.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But. Yeah, so anyway, pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, those were some big, monstrous black widows. Of course, they went squish really quick, but still kind of scary to see. Yeah. All right, well, we're going to go into, we're going to talk about this. We're going to wrap up this series on hiring a contractor. We just wanted to go in our second segment on hiring a contractor. We covered some basic considerations of a larger project, really getting your vision down. We've discussed that all the way through. We talked about materials, disruption to your life. We're big on that disruption to your life. We'll get into that more. How to actually search for good local contractors, and then also how to contract contractors. And folks, if you haven't listened to the first two shows, it really would be beneficial to listen to the first two shows in this series, because it's kind of a comprehensive overview of the whole process. And if you're listening to this show, there's a lot of things you'll understand, but there's also things that come out of those first two shows that are going to help you understand this. So at this point, you've made the decision on the type of company you want to hire, and you're going out to get a quote or an estimate, right, John? Is that where we're at?
That's where we're at. That's exactly right. So let's talk about the estimates and quotes, because you're going to get a variety of these type of this type of information back from the contractor.
Right.
They're going to either give you different people are going to give you different things.
Yeah,
one's going to give you an estimate,
and one's going to give you more of a quote.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about estimates too, because there's some things. So I ran into this with one of the big jobs we did last summer that we've talked about several times, where the guy had a major remodel, and he had originally gotten a quick estimate from the contractor, and the contractor threw him out a number. This is I'm going to call it a tactic. I think it's a tactic. And actually, it's funny. I've been watching some of these home repair shows on TV, and I actually saw this used on one of those shows on TV, and what it is it's the estimate, right? So the person comes in, they say, oh, I can do this, and I can do that, and I can do this, and I can do that. And what happens is they get halfway into the project, and all of a sudden they find out they either can't do it, or they won't do it, or they run into all kinds of problems. And in that estimate, like in this one I saw, they couldn't do it because of not a zoning, but an inspection problem if it was about ripping down a stairwell. And if they'd ripped down the stairwell, they would have had to rebuild the whole thing to current code, which it was not. So the key here with the estimate is be careful on the estimates, right? Because the guy gives you an estimate, and like in this case, it was going to cost him an extra $25,000 to change his stairwell. Well, that was not part of the actual quote, and the guy was a little pissed off, right, as you would be. Mm-hmm. So estimates. One of my things is, and I have this story about this guy that we did this work for. The guy gives him an estimate. He comes in and he starts the work, right? John, what happens when they start the work? They rip your house apart, right?
It's game on.
It's game on. So at the point where he comes back to him and he says, well, it looks like we're going to have a little overrun from the estimate. And the guy goes, what kind of overrun are we talking about? And he goes, I think it's going to be about $50,000. What do you want me to do? Well, big surprise, your house is torn up. You don't say to the guy, hey, hit the road, Jack. It's a tactic, right? They rope you in. They want to rope you in. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is the difference between an estimate and a quote. John, are there resources out there to get a quick estimate? Like if you're doing it?
Yeah, sure. You can Google, you can ask people, and to me, an estimate in this sense is that you're kind of getting your arms around what planet that you're on. Is it $10,000? Is it $50,000? Is it whatever it might be? So that's to me is kind of what an estimate is. That I can start to kind of put those things together. Now we want to be in this whole series. We're being fair to the contractor.
Correct.
So, we're either side. We're not trying to cheat anybody here. We're trying to make the best decision we can with the information that we have.
Right.
So the estimate, like I said, to me is that I'm just trying to get my arms around how big the bread box is here. So, then we can go into more of a refined quote from that, because a contractor, to your point, and I would be asking, I'd be asking that gentleman, how many other contractors that he might have had in there to give him a quote or to take a look at the job, because as you know, sometimes it is a voyage of discovery on some of these things, of that story about the stairwell.
Yep. So I wanted to add, in this case, so I said to this customer, this is the one from the summer, right? Who had the $50,000 overrun, we'll call it. I said to him, I said, well, this was a major remodel, and I threw out $1 per square foot figure for him, and it was based on kind of a combination of a remodel and a new construction type figure. And this is the figure that's pretty available out there if you Google, right? So if you Google out, right now, I'm just going to, and again, we're recording this in 2020, and I don't know what it is today, but when I looked at the beginning of the year, new construction on the low end was about $125 a square foot, right? So I think I flipped him a number of anywhere from $100 to $150 a square foot. And his comment back to me was, wow, I wish I had known that in advance. And so my point to you people out there is go Google, like, what should a bathroom, or whatever remodel you're doing is, what should it cost, with the various different levels. And you should be able to come up with a ballpark, right? I mean, you should be able to get that estimate in your head. And if a contractor comes in and he's way under that, it's either ask more questions or get some kind of clarification. Do you agree with that, John?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because in the other thing that you'll want to consider is that, you're going to have a low, medium, high type of thing, depending upon the quality of the materials and how nice. We've been discussing doing a bath, right?
Right.
For example, on the show. So, how nice do you want to have your the faucets and all the other things in there? So, you have to you're going to have to figure that in. But you're right. You can figure out about what this thing is going to be just by the square footage.
Yeah, there's some data out there, and it's available. Just do that quick Google search, you'll find it. So anyway, so that's that. All right, so that's some of that initial thing. So now it's time to get quotes, right? And generally, John, what do we suggest on getting a quote, an actual quote?
Well, so we talked about the differences in companies. So there's the businesses, tradesmen, and then you have some installers out there, different types of things. But you want to do an apples to apples on the quote. Okay, so it's kind of like from the same type of either a tradesman or the bigger businesses, and compare what they've got that they have in that quote. Now, a lot of the quotes will get. They'll have terms and all kinds of things in there, but, that should be laid out of what they're going to do.
Right.
Okay. And so I think that goes back to some of the things that we talked about before, is setting the expectation.
Correct.
But knowing what that is, so that you're prepared and you can plan for it.
Yeah, and definitely we want to discuss apples to apples. So you can't compare a tradesman to a large company. It's they work at a smaller scale. They don't have there's economies of scale and things like that. So choose them from the same types of things. And basically those quotes should be pretty close. So they shouldn't have I don't know, depending on the size of the scope of the project, but they shouldn't be thousands of dollars apart. Or again, smaller project, you know, you narrow the gap, but as a percentage, they shouldn't be 25 or 30% apart. Do you agree with that, John?
No, I do. And you brought up a good point before, was that, you know, if they are, then, you know, somebody needs to ask a question. You know?
Yeah, there's questions.
There's questions, and, you know, be a smart consumer on this, and kind of ask those questions, because you really do kind of need to, you know, educate yourself before you really go into this, as we've discussed before. But, you know, be aware of what's going on, because there is something going on. If they're the same level of businesses, you know, businesses or tradesmen or whatever, you know, contractor sizes, those, you know, if you're doing 3 of each, you know, you should be, like you said, they should be pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah. This is not magic, right? I mean, this, if you're going comparable to comparable, there's not a whole lot of difference. There just isn't. Nobody has a magic bullet to make it at a factor faster, right? For example, or
right.
You know, everything comes. The cost is basically the same. Materials, there's a big difference, and we've discussed that at length, so we don't need to get into that. But even then, you know, deep dive into the materials. If the guy comes back and says, you know, well, we're using these materials, and then you understand, you know, you have a better thing. So yeah, be educated, be smart about it. So yeah, that's one of those things. So some of the, you know, we've already talked about a lot of these things, but there's terms quotes and price quotes, right? So you can get a whole price quote, or you can get terms quotes. And terms quotes basically are, you know, we're going to do it by this date and at this kind of rate, or they'll just give you a whole price. And so I don't have a preference per which one you choose to do. Just be aware that you'll come with different, you know, there's different quotes, right? And definitely get you know, make sure you have your arms around the project. Understand who your contact is, who's the project manager, are they doing subcontractors? This is a big one, John. We like this one in writing. We'll talk about what to put in writing in a little bit, but definitely have a policy for communication, right? So understand, like, whose phone number do you have? How often are you going to be able to contact these guys? That kind of thing. Because if you get into these projects and you have questions, you need to be able to get your questions answered.
That's exactly right. And I will tell you that, and this is a big frustration point, on the consumer of this, is that if you can't get answers, that it's very frustrating. You know, if something is going on, the guys are there, they're working, and, you know, you have a question, a lot of times that those guys aren't, you know, the people who are doing the job aren't, you know, kind of the, you know, the project manager, right? You need to get a hold of
the boss,
that person who's the boss.
Yeah, the boss
who's in charge, and get some answers. So it's very, you know, once again, if it's all up front, and if you have the number, and you have that understanding between the two, and they want that too. Make no mistake, they want that too. That you understand and they understand, you know, how to communicate. You know, today it's pretty easy. You know, at one point, you know, it was hard to, you know, a phone, where's the guy? But now you can, you know, send them a text. Hey, you know, I have a question about this. Can you give me a call? You know, sure. Give me 5 minutes. You know, that thing. Okay, well, cool. But you know, if you can't get answers, that can be very frustrating. It goes back to what we've been talking about, is that, you know, what happens during all these big projects.
Yeah, and to that also, you want to have a kind of an understanding of focus, and also maybe some key performance indicators or timetable commitments. Now, you can't it's tough to hold people to this stuff, but you definitely want to know where you sit in their hierarchy of projects, right? Because if you're way down the list, you know, that's not so much a good thing, but you'll get a feel for that. You'll kind of understand. And then we talk about performance indicators all the time, and about timetable commitments. And you have to be careful with these things, because some of this stuff is kind of out of their control. There's weather issues and things or there can be, depends on the scope of the project, but you can have weather issues, things that are out of their control. But you want a basic timetable commitment. You know, you want an understanding that they're going to get it done in, you know, roughly X number of weeks, barring XYZ, right?
Right, and you know, and I think that's a great point, because sometimes it depends upon what kind of project that you have, and it is weather sensitive. So that is a great point, and just work with those contractors. You know, as long as you understand what how the game, what the game is, and the rules of the game, right? I guess it's not a game, but the rules. Then I think you're going to feel a whole lot better about knowing, because they're going to tell you, if I can get this done by X amount, and then they're going to go, well, the only thing, then you say, well, what would stand in your way of getting this done by, X date?
Right.
And then they're going to tell you. You need to ask those things, though. You need to ask those things, because so you don't get sideswiped. Yeah,
you need an understanding of that. And again, that's just part of this whole process. This is like trying to develop a good, strong partner, right? I mean, it's basically a marriage. Would you agree with that, John? It's kind of a marriage in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be living with these guys, for however long this project could be. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months. And
so we say that both euphemistically and literally, right? Because these guys are in your house every day, or they should be. They're in your house a lot, right?
Right.
So you're literally living.
So you just want to mitigate the frustration. And we talked about it earlier. I'm not going to rehash it, but you're bringing up a lot of good things here to mitigate that frustration and make things go smoothly. Everybody knows what they're going to do. Everybody knows how they're going to communicate, and from the communication standpoint, put down something that you're going to, every Friday or before you guys leave for the weekend. I want a 15-minute call with the project manager, telling, just explain exactly where we're at and where we're going to go from here, that kind of thing. So over the weekend, you can relax.
Right. And what's happened? Back to your question earlier, John, anything that's impeding progress? Is there anything we're doing that's pissing you guys off, or whatever? There's all kinds of different things. Or, the neighbor's dog came over and bit one of my guys. I mean, all of those things play, right? I mean, I know it sounds funny, right? But you just don't know. We parked on the street and the neighbors were complaining. You want all of that information.
Right. Exactly. And, I think the whole theme here, to me, was just to be fair with the contractor. We hear a lot of horror stories and things, just be fair back to, each other. And I think everything will go, a lot smoother than you think.
Yeah. And then we wanted to touch on materials. Now, we've already discussed it, but educate yourself on materials. Find out what that stuff's going to cost, that your particulars of what you want, because John, as we've said, you want to buy a bathroom faucet, they can be anywhere from, I don't know, $50 up to what do you want to spend? I mean,
that's right. That's exactly right.
So understand what you're purchasing in the material side, and do that. Payment schedules, John. This is a big one.
Well, let me pause right there.
Okay.
Because from the materials, I think, this is another thing to ask the contractor, because what they're going to do a lot of times is they're going to source materials and make money off of that, which is fine. But there might be times when you want to go out and get your own materials, let's say a certain tile, and be able to save money doing that. So there's ways to do that, right?
Yep.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Yeah.
One thing one thing we want to do, if you're going to purchase, I think we've already mentioned this, but I'm going to reiterate on this one. If you do purchase your own materials, make sure that you set up a delivery schedule that does not impede the progress of the project, right? So you do not want people waiting on materials. That's really especially if you're buying them, because think about it.
That's right.
If you're doing a software project and you're waiting on somebody to deliver something and they don't deliver it and it screws your whole schedule up, how happy does that make you? It makes you not very happy.
That's a great point not to be overlooked. Is know what the schedule is and the lead times of materials and delivery.
Yeah. So one of the biggest places, and we heard this in our interview with Chad, and we've heard this other places as well, and we know this is the case, is payment schedules, right, John?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So contractors need to get paid, right? You're basically hiring a company. They need to get paid. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's ways we suggest and ways we don't. And there's just some ways. John, you want to touch on some of the ways that you can pay?
There is that. Sometimes it depends upon how big the project is. Sometimes it might be an upfront kind of a retainer. You got to be careful with those, for a variety of reasons. But then some of the projects that I've had is that, they might be a 2-week project that at the end, you just pay the balance. Okay. But there's also on these bigger projects is a milestone or a draw type of arrangement where, you get to a certain point, just for sake of argument, you're going to demo. Okay, I'll give you $500. Then you're going to install, you're going to reround the plumbing in my kitchen. Okay, then I'll give you another $500. Then, so on and so forth. Just for
that's
sake of
milestone.
argument.
That's milestone.
Right. So that might be, a way to do it. And that should be, put in writing. So everybody knows what needs to be achieved and when the payment is going to be made.
Right. And that actually helps the contractor as well, because that allows him to put pressure if he's using subs or employees. It doesn't matter. It puts pressure. Or even if he's just a single guy, right? It doesn't necessarily put pressure, but he's got a goal, right? So he knows he gets paid when he does X. Now, that's a good way to do it. It's not the only way to do it. Some guys want just what's called a draw, right? So every week, if you've got a $25,000 project and it's going to take 5 weeks, they just want $5,000 a week. Right? 5 times 5 is 25.
Right.
Here's the one thing, John, we've said this before. We're going to say it again. We're going to beat this into your brain. Do not give them too much money. Do not pay in advance. That's the point. Because, John, what happens when you pay in advance? What can happen when you pay in advance?
This is when the horror stories start.
Correct.
A lot of guys will get complacent. They've got their money, and then they don't show up.
And they skip, right?
And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
So we've addressed finding these contractors, and we've kind of gone through that earlier. But that is something that the bigger guys or the guys that are connected, the tradesmen will probably all have a 30-day credit anyways at a material store where they're buying materials.
Right. So if they're asking for materials up front,
I'm talking about other stores that they buy stuff from.
Right.
So you give them don't just lay out a whole bunch of money and because they should have this float anyways.
Yeah, and even at the big box stores, John, right? Like, for example, I mean, myself, right? I have a commercial account with both Lowe's and with Home Depot on their commercial programs. They're literally commercial programs, and they give me 30 days float, right? So it's 30, so I can go out and buy materials, and that's due at the end of 30 days. So even in the you say in the big box stores, but even in the big box stores, they have that program. So particularly if somebody's asking you for money to buy materials on a big project, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say be very careful. So John and I are not attorneys, so understand this in advance. I'm going to put that disclaimer out there. But I would be really careful. If somebody wants $25 or I don't know, even $5,000 as a down payment, $1,000 as a retainer is one thing. $5,000 or $6,000 for a bathroom remodel is a little on the heavy side. That's basically somebody asking you for almost all the materials just to get started. And in my opinion, that's too much.
Somebody's got to have some skin in the game.
Correct. And that both people need to have some skin in the game. So to be fair to the contractors, I mean, not a problem in paying a deposit. The question is, how much of a deposit do you put down? That's right. Let's draw the analogy to buying a house, right? So you're buying a $200,000 house. Do you put down $40,000 as your retainer? This cat doesn't,
Yeah. No.
Maybe a couple, but it's a show of good faith. So understand that it's a double-edged sword. We understand that, but we just want you to understand. Don't give them too much money, is what it is. All right. So we've talked about that. So let me I'm going to tell this story about. So we did this bathroom remodel that we've talked about in the show. So I didn't need to put down a deposit on that. So but we did schedule it out. So understand, I have a very strong working relationship with this contractor. But I offered up. Do you want some money down to show good faith? He turned me down because blah blah blah. We already had the scope of project described out. When we do the shows, believe it or not, all these things we put forth to you folks, I actually do this when I hire somebody. And I don't do could I have done this bathroom myself? Sure, I could have, but it was a question of time and effort and so forth and so on. And plus, it's just sometimes you just say, no, I'm gonna do it. Have somebody do it. We did purchase all the materials on this, but we used his guidance and we used some of his suppliers, and we did that on a reason because he didn't want to lay out. He's a single tradesman guy. We'll call him a tradesman guy. And he didn't want to lay out the money. And I was okay with that. But I wanted to own the materials. So if for whatever reason, if something did happen, which it didn't, and it wouldn't probably, well, he could have had a health issue. Anyway, I wanted to own the materials. So we bought the materials. We had them delivered. We actually had them all delivered long in advance of when he needed them, which was fine. It was a lot of tiles, so it's not like it goes bad. But anyway, with that, we did all of that. As we got close to the date of when he was going to start, because remember, we had to book him like 2 months out, he contacted me about a week before and said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to start. Is that okay?" And I said, "Rock on, let's do it," kind of thing. But we had good communication going on all the way. Mm-hmm. We already had talked about a draw schedule. He basically told us he was going to invoice us weekly, and we were okay with that. And mm-hmm. I was in on the job, looking at it as about once a week or so. I have a great level of trust with this guy, so I don't generally need to really check it. But there were some things. There were actually a few small things that came up as I would go and look at the account at the job that I asked a couple of questions, and he actually did a couple of very small changes. They weren't real work order changes, but there were some things there that he was not going to do that I asked him to do, and just because I'm kind of OCD on some of this stuff. So that was not, and those were not major changes, by the way. They were just some real minor stuff, like, hey, could you move the outlet down about 2 inches, mm-hmm. Stuff like that. So we did that, and then he did charge us for some additional materials, which was fine. Like he charged me for some screws and stuff. I didn't even want to get into purchasing that stuff in advance. We were okay with that. But I mean, I'm going to use an experience of long ago. I had a similar arrangement with a different contractor, and he charged me for 5 saw blades on an 800 square foot room. And I'm like, yeah, no. I will give you 1 saw blade.
Yeah, and I think that's something that everybody needs to look at is a detailed invoice. What are they actually invoicing you for?
Yeah,
I mean, go over everything. Just keep an eye on it. It's like anything else.
Yeah, and he would provide me receipts on anything that he bought for himself, like not so much screws and nails and stuff, but he would keep, if he bought anything that he needed, just say extra grout or something like that, he would give me the receipt, and I was okay with that. Mm-hmm. And then, finally at the end of the thing, we held out 10% for a final inspection. So I didn't pay him 10% on final inspection on the job. And that's just one of the things that do not pay people off until you actually have gone through the punch list, right? So that is something that you've got to do. Any comments on that, John?
No, I think that's a great way to do it. You worked with this guy, you knew him. Everything went, just about according to the way you had thought, and you paid him as a professional.
Yes.
I know he's a friend of yours and those kind of things, but if you're going to hire a friend, you got, and they are a professional in their real life, is you got to pay them that way, and that's a respect thing, right?
Oh, very much so. Yep.
So I think holding out that final payment is a good thing, and it's respected on both sides.
Yep. Very much so.
Because you know what, if they're doing a great job, they have pride in their work, and they're fine with that. There's always going to be a little punch list here or there. Then it shouldn't take very long to accomplish that, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, and he did get several dinners out of this deal, so I'm just saying,
Yeah.
Tipping is okay, by the way,
yeah,
if you really like what your guys do.
Right.
So.
Right.
We wanted to go through kind of a bit of a step-by-step. If it's somebody you didn't know, my story is it's not unique, but it's unique enough. So we wanted to talk about some of the things that you actually need to put in writing, right, John? And this is just one of the things that this is if you're dealing with somebody that you don't have any experience with, you're just not really totally comfortable with somebody. I think you've got to put your vision down, what your goals are and what you want the project to look like. And that could be just real quick, and that can be done in email. It can be done long before, but have it documented. You want something for the guy to look at.
I agree 100%. Let's not forget that there are contracts too out there that you can pull off of LegalZoom or Rocket or whatever, that from you can hit. They're already pro forma type of things back to a contractor, from the consumer to the contractor.
Right.
And these kind of things are in what you're bringing up here. Those kind of things are in there. The description of the description of the services and the work to be performed. So it's kind of what the vision. And you can just detail that out. if it's not already detailed out from, the contractor himself, just be aware that, all their paperwork you're going to sign is all really slanted their way to their advantage. So you just need to go through that and make sure that, your advantage is in there too. So you're right. The vision of what you want,
and,
how you're going to, like you said here.
We do this for a couple of reasons, right? So if a contractor is using any kind of subcontractors, right? So, and almost all are going to do on a big project, you're going to have some subs because you don't have an electrical license and blah blah blah. You might not have all of the licensing. If you have it written down, it clarifies that communication between the contractor and his subs as well, right? Particularly, I'm big on pictures. So if you throw a picture out there, it gives everybody clarity, and it allows him to hand this off very simply. You actually make his job simpler. That's my opinion. I when somebody hands me a picture, I'm like, we can do that, kind of thing. Yeah. So that's why I say just the more details, the better. Be clear about the materials. This all needs to be in writing. Be clear. Who supplies what? Do you have any brand preferences? Who's paying for it?
I think let me pause you there a second, Larry. I think that's a great point. Brand preferences. When I had my house built, you just things just get steamrolled over you, kind of, because it's the whole process is so complex, so comprehensive and complex that that's a great point. Is to educate yourself on the type of appliances and if you have the brand preferences.
Well, it goes to everything,
that
right?
Makes to everything, and that is really a good point, because you're gonna go out and research and get yourself educated. But while you're doing it, hey, this type of, for the bathroom, these kind of faucets are really great. This kind of tile, all these kind of things. It's a lot of work, but you're right. The brand preferences.
Yeah, just from us, right? We see this as handymen. We see this all the time. John, are there faucets that you can't replace the seals on?
That's right, and that's a great example of it. There's some really, really cheap faucets out there, but you just have to be aware of it. Then there's, like you said, the sky's the limit, but
and then there's another.
These are the kind of things you think about.
Yeah, and there's another one. There's a toilet company out there that they want to reinvent the wheel. It seems like on every toilet they bring out, so they have different parts. And personally, and the handyman side drives me crazy because they tell me they've got this brand. I'm not going to name the brand because I don't want to name the brand. But you go in, you're like, oh, I've got to have 14 different parts for this thing, where in every other toilet I have one. So that's why brand preference matters, right? So so then also, have a consultation with the contractor about quantities, especially if you're going to supply materials. Make sure you order enough. Make sure don't let them go back. Don't slow up things. Don't make it slow and don't be penny wise and pound foolish, right? Sometimes, this is an interesting aside, but we're looking at like HVAC units, right? And a big contractor can actually buy HVAC like units, like an actual air conditioning unit. If they're a big enough contractor, they can buy it cheaper than a distributor. So be aware, be heads up on that. He sometimes can make a little money on that thing because he buys in such volume. So we let you know that so that you understand that. Always ask for the quote. It might not be the lowest. It might be the lowest. And if I can buy through the contractor at what I consider to be a value add price, or if it's worth it to me, I'll buy it through the contractor because he's going to stand behind it, and I don't have to worry about it. Right?
Yeah, that's interesting because I had that as part of the deal when I built the house, is that I could use the contractor and go down to get lights at his cost, lighting at his cost.
Yes.
So it was all the fixtures, that I wanted to put up, including ceiling fans and all that kind of stuff, but I could get it at his cost. Right. So, ask. I think that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point.
Yeah, ask. And also one other thing too is, and this is my favorite, John. We talk about this in the handyman business all the time about paint, right? We don't, as the contractor doesn't have to live with it. You do. And
That's correct.
And so pick what you want. And if the contractor's saying, hey, there's 8,000 different lights, go down, use my number, and here you go, take advantage of that because wow. And it's kind of funny, John. I was just on a job yesterday, and it had to do with they were putting up a ceiling fan. And they wanted to match their other ceiling fans. And so anyway, they went to the local Home Depot, and they go in there. Well, they found out that there were 4 different styles of just the arm. The base of the fan was the same, but the arms were all different. So they had to come home because they didn't snap a picture of their fan to know that they had the exact match. So understand that's a lot of the reason why a contractor is going to ask you to go pick your own stuff because there's too many choices. Oh my goodness. Right? Too many choices. So another thing that we describe when we put in writing, right? We talk about this a lot. We always talk about this a lot, but the disruption to your life, right? So get a rough timetable, right? How long is this going to take, right? And stick it in writing. It says you can hold it to them to a degree. You can actually write your contract in such a way that if you don't finish this by XYZ date, that it's going to start costing you money. That in most commercial jobs, that's how they do it. Where they,
penalties there.
Yeah, they have performance penalties where if you don't finish that roadway by XYZ date, it's going to cost you $1 million a day. There's pros and cons to doing that kind of thing, and Chad talked about that to a degree on the show we did with Chad Carson. It's tough to enforce on a home type basis, where you're not in if you're doing a really big project, maybe, but there's also a lot of mitigating factors that can be kind of tough on that, but you still can threaten it. You still want an idea. You want to have a realistic idea or a range, right? So if I'm out quoting something myself, I'm going to range somebody. I'm going to say, well, in a perfect world, it's going to take me this amount of time. The reality is this amount of time plus a week, and the drop dead date is this amount of time plus 2 weeks or whatever it is. But have a range, understand it's going to take a certain amount of time because that's to help you and it helps them as well. The more that a contract, I don't want to say they feel pressure, but if everybody's clear, it's just easier for everybody involved. It's just easier. And then when you're having your conversations with the guy, you say, how are we on the time frame? And the guy's going to tell you, he goes, we're running good, or we had some bad weather, so we're a little bit behind, or whatever the reasons are. There's a lot of, there's about a bazillion different things that can happen. But it's just nice to have it in writing that you have an idea. Put in writing also how do people access the facility. So if you're doing a remodel on your house, how do they get in and out? Right. And are there times involved? Right, John? Do you want people coming in your house at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah. I mean, put it all in writing. And a lot of times if you're, at work, like you said, how are they going to access the house? Yeah,
and another one is just a security issue. Are they, you could ask for them to be bonded. It depends on the size of the thing, but the size of your project. But, if they're in your house, you have things in your house you don't want stolen and so forth and so on. And so there is a level of trust there that goes as well. Yeah. So, and again, these are just things to think about. It doesn't mean it's an absolute, but you might want to put something in there. John, this is one of our big ones, right? Cleanup.
Right. Who's going to be responsible for the cleanup and how often? And, are they going to leave the job site every day, clean? Or it's just, once again, everybody wants to do a good job, but it's just that expectation, setting the expectations. You're going to feel a whole lot better so that these kind of things don't get away from you. And then the stress level gets high. And the next thing you know, you're going sideways with each other, and that's over a bag that wasn't cleaned up,
yes.
something like that.
Yes, because it's
it was probably no bad intentions meant. It was just that, but it's just it's always nice to know who's going to be responsible for what.
It's the death of 1,000 cuts, right?
Right.
Because when you're living in it, it's the little things that drive you crazy. Right. John, you have a great story about tortillas.
Tell
it, because it's worth it.
I mean, I just have, everybody was inside my house and it was all kind of stressed out. And I'll tell you that it was to the point that, I had my floors done, all my hardwood floors redone, and that took 4 days. I had to move out. Then I had the painters come in. And that was almost as bad. I mean, everything was I was just stressed out. Anyways, long story short, next thing I know, it's like they're pulling out all my extension cords and stuff and plugging them in, and everybody's on a driveway eating lunch and stuff, cooking and stuff. I'm like, everybody's sprawled out on my furniture on my deck.
Yeah, cooking tortillas,
like,
right?
And stuff is thrown around, and water bottles are just blowing around and stuff. And I was like, man, so back to the communication. I had a good communication, right, with the boss.
Right.
Because I had set that up early, and I called him. I said, look, man, I love the guys, but this is getting a little out of hand, and I could kind of feel my blood pressure starting to go up, so I kind of caught that one and nipped it in the bud early.
Yeah, I tell a story of I was on a job, and this happened to be at the lake, one of the lake houses, and I see the guys are down fishing, and I'm like, you're fishing on the job. And fortunately it wasn't the people I was working for. It was actually, they were working on a house next door. And I'm looking at them, I'm going, for real? Like, for real. But whatever, right? A lack of professionalism.
There's some things that there's no lack of amazement. Of what can take place. So, anyways.
Anyway. So, and another one, and I personally believe, put this in writing, because too many times I've gone in to do work for people, and we come out and they're calling me up saying, "Can you do this?" And I go, "Why would I do that?" They go, "We just had our." I'm going to use a shower example. We just had, and that is the question is this job turnkey, right? So will this be fully functional when you're done? And I'm going to tell a real quick story. So I get a call from one of my neighbors. He's like, "We just had our shower done, and can you put a glass door on?" And I said, "What do you mean? You just had your shower done?" And then and then I get there, and it's not only the glass door, but they hadn't even reinstalled the plumbing. And I looked, and I asked him a question. I said, I go, "Who's putting the plumbing in?" I said, "When are they coming back to put the plumbing in?" And she goes, "Well, they're not. We have to call a plumber." And I said,
"Yeah, see, this is the typical thing."
And I was like, "This isn't turnkey. I mean, you can't. If you hire somebody, shouldn't you be able to walk in and use it?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's lessons learned right there, and that's a lot of times with hiring just even a plumber. Well, we're talking about contractors and stuff, but I'm talking about sometimes they come in and they got to cut the wall apart, and putting the wallboard back together is not in their description, but it's things like that you're talking about right now that you need to understand where their job starts and where it stops.
Correct. Yeah. Have an understanding and make sure and put that in writing for sure. So, and you just used that a great example as a plumber, even that's a small job, right? That's not even a 1-day job. It's like a 4-hour job, right? And they come in, they cut a hole in the back of your wall in your shower, and they leave. And you're like, because how many times have we had to repair the drywall on those, John, as handyman?
No, all the time. Or they'll bust out or worse, bust out the tile in the front. Now you're stuck with a guy that's got to, you got to get somebody in there to retile.
Right. So
it's endless that way. You just need to understand where things start and stop. And what we're talking about here is that you just have to be aware. And most of the jobs that we're talking about here is in terms of the bathrooms and kitchens should be a turnkey thing. But there's nothing like being aware of what's what.
Right. So let's wrap this baby up. So just what are the key takeaways from this series, John?
Well, from our first episode, we were talking about, just planning and your expectations and starting to get educated on things, so that you can start to prepare, this experience. Let's call it an experience, because it's both, what we talked about was the disruption of your life and your family, and also working with a contracting company to go ahead and get the project completed.
Yeah, and then our second takeaway was just in episode 2, we really talked about contacting and vetting contractors, how to do that efficiently, how to get more information, how to really figure out like what you're looking for. Again, it's part of the planning process, but it's really helps you understand. And then what's the third thing, John?
Yeah. And then just the contract back to you. You found a guy. If we talked about today, you're finding the selected person or company to perform the services, and just be very aware of what's going on. And if to get a contract back with them.
That's
like
fair
I said
to
earlier,
you,
is that
right?
their contracts, all their legal stuff is going to be slanted to their advantage, of course. But you need to understand, you need to have something that's slanted to your advantage. So just be aware of that. Educate yourself on how this thing's going to come down. And if they don't want to have a contract back with you, and they don't want to change their contract, well, then something's wrong.
That's next, in my opinion. Yeah, that's next. If they don't want to have that, if they don't want to put those things in writing, that's a qualifier, in my opinion. There should be no problem in giving you general guidelines. General guidelines. Again, we're talking about being fair to both parties involved, and if they don't want to be fair to you, that's a true sign of next, in my opinion. And then the fourth thing is just the big thing, and we talked this all the way through, and we just talked about it right there. It's clarity and communication. Just be clear, have everybody be on the same page, and you're going to save yourself just a huge amount of pain and angst. So, John, we've got questions and comments. We really want some feedback on this series of shows, right, John?
Absolutely, we do.
Yeah. So please, if anything we've said ticks you off, or if anything is like really good, send us an email. It's questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. You can go on our website and you can leave a voice message if you want. Actually, up on the right-hand corner there, it says leave a voice message. You click on that, we'll get a voice message from you. You can. And that's at handymanprosradioshow.com. You can join our Facebook group, which is at Handyman Pros. And send us an email, whatever. Text us, or not text us, but you can private message us on Facebook. You can. My email address is out there as well. So all of those kinds of things. Get a hold of us if you have any questions and concerns. John, is there a spaceship in your front yard?
Yes, it always comes down about this time, Larry.
It's amazing. What do we do when we see a spaceship besides run for the hills?
Well, I got to figure out what I've had. Yeah, it's either you got to get your metric tools. I don't know what these guys are using anymore. Imperial or metrics. But
see, I
I got both, and
I figure they're looking through this time machine. So the last one I took apart was in Wentworth, right? So send me an email if you know what Wentworth is. But so anyway.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.